You already know what I'm about to describe. You've been in a room full of people and felt completely alone, not because no one was talking to you, because even while they were talking to you, something inside you was somewhere else entirely, reading them, feeling the weight of what they weren't saying, carrying things they didn't even know they'd handed you. And by the time you got home, you were exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with anything you'd physically done. You called it a long day. You blamed the traffic. You blamed the schedule. But somewhere underneath all that, you knew. The thing that drained you wasn't the work, it was the people. And here's what you've never quite had permission to say out loud. You feel better alone, not occasionally, consistently. The moments you feel most like yourself are the quiet ones, the ones where there's no one to read, no room to calibrate, no invisible performance to maintain, just silence, just you. And in that silence, something in you finally exhales. Most people would hear that and say you're broken. They would be wrong. Carl Jung spent his life studying the people who feel everything, the ones whose inner world runs so deep that the outer world never quite fits. And what he found wasn't a defect, it was a different kind of architecture, one that requires different conditions to function. Not more noise, more quiet, not more presence, more space. The most terrifying thing, Jung wrote, is to accept oneself completely, not to be accepted by others, not to finally earn the approval of the room, just to accept yourself, exactly as you are in the silence without anyone else's noise filling the gap. The people who manage to do that almost always make the same choice. They choose to be alone, not because they failed at connection, because they understand something about energy and attention and inner life that most people are simply too distracted to discover. And this video is going to tell you exactly what that something is. Why the people who feel the most deeply are often the ones who guard their solitude the most fiercely. Why emotional intelligence, real emotional intelligence, doesn't make you need people more. It makes you more careful about which rooms you bring yourself into. Stay until the last part because it changes everything. 1. The hidden cost of being around people. You are paying a price right now that nobody ever told you about. It doesn't show up on any invoice. It leaves no visible mark. But you feel it every time you spend a long day surrounded by people. The meetings, the small talk, the casual conversations that ask nothing of you on the surface and take something from you underneath. By the end of it, something is gone. Something that was there when you woke up is no longer there when you close the door behind you. And you call it tiredness. You call it a draining day. But let's be precise about what is actually happening. You are not just tired from the effort. You are tired from the reading, because that's what you do, constantly, involuntarily. You walk into a room and you are already measuring the temperature of it. You listen to someone talk and you are hearing two things at once, what they are saying and what they are not saying. You feel the shift in the air when someone's mood changes before they've shown it on their face. You notice the specific quality of a laugh that is working too hard. You sense the moment a conversation turns, the exact second when what is unsaid becomes heavier than anything that is. This is not a choice. You cannot turn it off. It is always running. And here is what no one tells people like you. That constant and involuntary processing has a cost. Every interaction is a transaction. Most people don't feel that. Their nervous system picks up the obvious signals and lets the rest pass. Yours receives everything, every frequency, every subtle shift in the atmosphere of a room. And receiving all of that all the time without rest drains something real. Jung called it psychic energy, the inner force that drives attention, perception, engagement. He observed that for certain people, people built the way you are built. Outward engagement doesn't generate energy the way it does for others. It depletes it. The inner world is not a background process. It is the main event. And when the outer world demands too much for too long, the inner world goes quiet. Not from peace, from exhaustion. This is why you love people, but you need to recover from them. This is why even good conversations, even relationships you genuinely value, leave you needing silence afterward. It is not a character flaw. It is not antisocial behavior dressed up in philosophy. It is just the honest physics of how you are wired. And the people who finally stop apologizing for that, the ones who stop forcing themselves into rooms they're not built for, who stop mistaking constant connection for genuine belonging, they discover something that changes the way they move through the world. You cannot give from an empty place, and you cannot refill in a noisy one. 2. Solitude is not loneliness, and the difference changes everything. People have a word for what you do when you choose to be alone. They call it lonely, as if solitude and loneliness are the same country, as if every person sitting in a quiet room must be suffering, tallying missed calls, waiting for rescue, measuring their worth by how many people didn't check in. The assumption is so automatic, so embedded in the way most people think, that almost no one stops to question it. They see you alone and they project onto you what being alone feels like to them: uncomfortable, hollow, something to escape as fast as possible. They assume it feels that way for you too. It doesn't. Here's what no one tells you about loneliness. You can be lonely in a room of 50 people. You can be lonely in a relationship. You can be lonely at a table full of laughter, in the middle of a conversation that's been going for an hour, surrounded by people who are genuinely fond of you. Loneliness has almost nothing to do with how many people are around you. It has everything to do with whether you are actually being seen. And you know this. You've felt the specific loneliness of performing yourself in a room, offering the version that fits, leaving the rest of yourself standing outside, smiling through a conversation that moves across the surface of things without ever touching anything real. That particular ache of being present and invisible at the same time, that is loneliness. And it is far worse than anything you feel sitting alone in a quiet room. Because when you are alone, you stop performing. You stop translating yourself for an audience that can't follow. Stop adjusting your frequency to match a room that was never built for your signal. The performance ends, and something quieter and truer and far more nourishing begins. Paul Tillich made a distinction that most people will never hear and almost everyone needs. He wrote, "Language has created the word loneliness to express the pain of being alone, and it has created the word solitude to express the glory of being alone." Two states, same external condition, entirely different internal experience. One happens to you, the other you choose. And here is what choosing it actually feels like from the inside. Not the aesthetic version, not the soft lit room with the book and the candle and the curated piece, the real version. You close the door, and the first thing you feel is not happiness, not even peace, relief. The relief of someone who has been holding their breath for hours and has finally been allowed to exhale. That is solitude, not the absence of something you wanted, the presence of something you needed, yourself without the weight of everyone else's signals constantly running through you. The people who discover this, who stop treating their need for solitude as a problem to fix and start treating it as information about how they work, they stop being ashamed of the quiet. They stop manufacturing social activity to prove they're okay. They stop performing belonging in rooms where they've never actually belonged. And in the space that opens up, they start building something real. 3. Why emotional intelligence makes you more selective, not more distant. Something happens when you start being honest about what actually costs you. You stop going back to certain rooms, not with a speech, not with a confrontation, just quietly, the way a river changes course, not violently, but inevitably, because the landscape underneath has shifted. And people who watch this from the outside will give it a name. They'll say you've become cold, difficult, that you used to be more open, that something changed. They're right, something did change. You started paying attention to the cost. Because here's the thing about emotional intelligence that no one tells you. It doesn't just make you better at reading people. It makes you better at reading what being around certain people does to you. And the more accurately you can feel that, not just understand it intellectually, but actually feel it in the body in the first few minutes of being with someone, the less willing you become to keep paying for rooms that leave you empty. This is not coldness. This is the opposite of coldness. Cold people don't care enough to notice. You notice everything. And because you notice everything, you have learned the hard way, over years of giving your full presence to spaces that didn't know what to do with it, that not every room deserves what you bring into it. Think about what it actually costs you to perform smallness, to arrive at certain relationships already pre-edited, already translated, already stripped of the parts that would be too much for the person across from you. You've done it. You know what it feels like. You leave feeling less like yourself than when you arrived, as if the interaction required you to compress into a shape that doesn't fit, and returning to your actual size takes longer each time. Machiavelli wrote that a man who tries to be everything to everyone will ultimately be nothing to anyone. Most people read this as cynicism. It isn't. It's a warning against a specific kind of self-betrayal, the kind where you dilute yourself so thoroughly in the service of being acceptable that there is eventually nothing left to offer that is real. The emotionally intelligent person who becomes more selective is not closing the door on people. They are leaving it open only for the ones who can meet them without requiring them to be less. And here is the part that takes the longest to understand. That selectivity doesn't make you lonelier. It makes the connections you do choose more real. Because when you stop bringing a performance into a room and bring yourself instead, the actual, unedited, sometimes inconvenient self, the people capable of meeting that are revealed. And the ones who cannot, quietly, reveal themselves too. You don't need to announce the difference, you just need to notice it and then let it guide you. 4. The inner world is real work, and it requires space. There is a kind of work that leaves no evidence, no deliverable, no output, no way to explain, at the end of an afternoon spent in your own quiet company, what exactly you did. You sat, you thought, things that were tangled became slightly cleaner, something heavy became slightly lighter, something that had been sitting in your chest without a name got a few minutes of honest attention, and stopped demanding it so loudly. Most people would look at that afternoon and call it wasted, and you might have agreed with them once, before you understood what was actually happening in the quiet. Here's what's happening. The most important work a person ever does occurs in exactly the space that the world calls useless. The work of understanding yourself, of sitting with experiences you've been too busy to process, of facing things you've been too distracted to face, of becoming more honest with yourself than the noise of other people ever allows. All of it happens in the silence that most people fill as fast as they can. Carl Jung spent decades describing a process he called individuation, the long, lifelong work of becoming who you actually are, not who you were shaped to be, not the version of yourself that your social circle can comfortably accommodate, not the person who learned early which parts of themselves were acceptable and which needed to stay hidden, the real one, the one that has been there all along waiting for a quiet moment to be heard. And he was unambiguous about what this work requires. You cannot hear a whisper in a room that is always full. In each of us, he wrote, there is another whom we do not know. He speaks to us in dreams and tells us how differently he sees us from how we see ourselves. The work of emotional intelligence is not only the work of reading other people, it is the harder work of reading yourself, without the flattering distortions that company provides, without the comfortable stories that social life quietly reinforces. Just you and what is actually true, and the slow, sometimes uncomfortable process of closing the gap between those two things. This is what changes when you start doing that work consistently. You stop being surprised by your own reactions. You stop wondering, after an unexpected surge of feeling, where that came from, because you've been paying attention. You see the patterns in yourself before they move. And because you see them, you have a choice about what to do with them. You become less reactive, not because you feel less, because you understand more. The person who comes out on the other side of this work carries themselves differently, not because they perform differently, because something has actually shifted inside and the people around them feel it, even when they can't name what they're feeling. That shift cannot be manufactured in company. It is built in the quiet, alone. 5. When you stop needing approval, something strange happens. There's a moment when something changes. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives gradually, almost without you noticing, until one day you realize you've stopped doing something you used to do constantly. You've stopped explaining yourself. Not because you've given up on being understood, Not because you've decided people aren't worth the effort, because your sense of who you are has stopped depending on whether anyone agrees with it. And when that happens, when the ground you stand on is finally yours and not borrowed from other people's opinions of you, something that has been tight for a very long time quietly releases. Here is the paradox of approval seeking that almost no one examines directly. The more you need people to confirm your worth, the more you adjust, perform, soften your edges, edit your truth to make it easier to receive, the less real you become to the very people you are trying to reach. They can feel the performance. They sense, even without being able to name it, when someone is constructing themselves in real time for the room. And the thing you are working so hard to earn, genuine recognition, real connection, the experience of being truly seen, retreats the harder you reach. But stop reaching. Let the performance end. Stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided what to think. Stop adjusting, stop accommodating, and something unexpected happens. People begin to encounter you differently. There is a quality to a person who has stopped needing approval that is immediately perceptible, even if no one in the room can say what they're perceiving. It is not arrogance. Arrogance is loud. Arrogance is slightly desperate beneath its surface, always defending against some imagined threat. This is something quieter, a settledness, a groundedness that doesn't move when someone disagrees or withholds validation or responds in exactly the way you hope they wouldn't. A quality that communicates without a word, I know who I am. Your agreement is welcome, but my existence does not require it. Machiavelli understood the mechanics of this. A leader who requires constant reassurance from the people beneath him, he observed, has already transferred his authority to them. Whoever controls your need for validation controls your behavior, quietly, invisibly, without even intending to. Every decision becomes pre-negotiated with an invisible audience. Every move filtered through, will this be accepted? Will this cost me something I can't afford to lose? The person who has built their own ground to stand on simply cannot be controlled in that way. And here's the strange thing that follows. The crowd that was never enough when you were reaching for it, when you finally stop reaching, when the hunger for it disappears from your posture and your eyes, begins to come closer. Not because you've become more appealing in some surface way, but because people are drawn, almost without knowing why, to someone who is genuinely complete in themselves. Someone who is not secretly asking anything of the room. It is the oldest paradox of connection. The less you need it, the more it finds you. 6. The three connections that quietly empty you. Not all exhaustion comes from effort. Some comes from people, not bad people, not people who mean you harm, but people in specific dynamics, dynamics that have a particular shape, a particular current running through them, that costs something you cannot always see being taken until it is already gone. You know these dynamics. You've been in them. The first one is the conversation that circles without arriving anywhere. You've been in it. Someone talks, you listen, you respond, they talk again, and 20 minutes in, the room is full of words, but nothing real has been said. The surface moves. The depth doesn't. For most people, this is simply neutral, mildly boring at worst. But for you, it is not neutral, because you cannot stop reading beneath the surface. You feel the gap between what is being said and what is actually true underneath it. You hold that awareness the entire conversation without being able to put it down, while also participating in the performance of what is. That is labor, invisible labor, and it adds up across every interaction every day. The second is the relationship that requires you to perform smallness, where the version of you that is welcome is not the whole version, where you arrive already pre-edited, the parts that would be too much left standing at the door. You know this feeling. You leave certain people feeling less like yourself than when you arrived, as if you were compressed into a shape that doesn't fit, and the return to your actual size takes longer each time. Over years, this is not a small cost. It is the slow erosion of your own sense of who you are. The third is the one-directional drain. You ask, you listen, you remember things they mentioned in passing 3 months ago. You notice when something is off, and you check in. You show up. And if the situation were reversed, if you arrived depleted and needed something back, the response wouldn't be refusal. it would be something more disorienting than refusal. Blankness, genuine confusion, because the other person never registered that the exchange had a structure, that it was always running in one direction, that what felt like connection was, in practice, a very sophisticated form of one-sided care. Here's what these three dynamics have in common. They cost you yourself, piece by piece, interaction by interaction. And for someone who feels everything, the bill arrives faster than most people expect. Recognizing this is not the same as leaving. Sometimes you stay in a relationship knowing its shape because the person matters and the cost is bearable, but you stay differently, with clarity instead of confusion, without expecting from someone what they are not structured to give, without pouring from a place that was already empty and calling it love. The emotionally intelligent person who guards their solitude is not avoiding people. They are protecting the quality of presence they can bring when they choose to show up. Because showing up full is always worth more than showing up drained and calling it dedication. 7. Solitude is where you become dangerous. There is a certain kind of person that other people cannot quite locate. They are present when they choose to be. They engage fully when it matters. But there is something about them, something in the way they hold themselves, the way they listen without performing listening, the way they are not checking the room for approval, that creates a quiet unease in everyone who is always performing, as if this person's stillness is an indictment, as if their apparent lack of need is itself a form of power. It is. Most people believe power comes from connection, from the size of your network, from how many people would take your call. And so they build outward, they maintain, they keep the connections warm, the conversations flowing, the presence known and felt and appreciated. There's nothing wrong with this exactly, but it builds a particular kind of stability, the kind that shakes when people leave, the kind that requires constant maintenance to hold its shape. Real power, the kind that doesn't depend on external conditions, that doesn't require anyone's presence to remain intact, is built in the opposite direction, inward, in the hours no one sees, in the quiet that looks from the outside like nothing at all. When you spend real time alone, not idle time, not the passive isolation of scrolling through someone else's life, but the honest, intentional kind, where you are genuinely present with your own thoughts and the slow accumulation of self-knowledge, something happens to the quality of your judgment. The noise of other people's expectations recedes. The anxiety of being evaluated fades. And what remains is something cleaner, your actual read on things, unfiltered by the need to be approved of. You stop making decisions to manage other people's reactions. You start making decisions because they are true. And people who operate from that place, from clarity rather than from the management of perception, are extraordinarily difficult to manipulate because the primary lever of manipulation is need. Someone needs your approval, you offer it conditionally. Someone needs to be liked, you withdraw warmth and watch them adjust. But a person who has built their stability alone, who knows exactly who they are without requiring anyone to confirm it, that person is operating from a place the lever simply cannot reach. This is what it means to become dangerous, not aggressive, not cold, just self-contained, grounded in something built rather than borrowed, unmoved by the tools that move everyone else. Jung wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." The person who has done the inward work is awake in a room full of dreamers. They see what others are still looking for. They are not startled by what becomes obvious later, because they were paying attention in the quiet long before the obvious arrived. And then there's the final counterintuitive thing, the thing most people never reach, because they are too busy performing in the direction of connection to discover it. When you stop needing the crowd's validation to feel real, when you reach the place where your presence is complete before anyone else enters the room, the crowd begins to notice you. Not because you performed for it, not because you broadcast your worth, but because there is something in a person who is genuinely not reaching, a calm and unhurried quality, the specific stillness of someone with nothing to prove that other people feel before a word is spoken. It is the one thing that cannot be manufactured. And because it cannot be manufactured, when people encounter it, something in them recognizes it as real. The most powerful thing you can do in a world that demands your constant, distracted, anxious attention is withdraw it, turn it inward, build something in the quiet that the noise could never have built. And when that something becomes visible, when it starts showing in how you move, how you choose, how you hold yourself, you will not be asking for a reaction. You will simply be standing there, and that will be enough. So let them misunderstand you. Let them look at your preference for quiet and call it loneliness. Let them look at your boundaries and call you cold. Let them see your solitude and read it as failure. They are working with the only map they have, one that says connection means quantity and stillness means something went wrong. You know something different now. The people who feel the most deeply are often the ones who protect their inner world most fiercely. Not because they are running from life, because they understand something about what life actually requires of them. That they cannot read a room without first having sat in their own. That they cannot offer real presence to others without having spent real time with themselves. That the quiet hours, the ones no one sees, the ones that leave no evidence, are where the real work happens. And one day, the proof of it will be visible in the quality of your choices, in the steadiness you carry into difficult rooms, in the depth of what you are able to give when you finally choose to give it. People will say you changed. They will say you found yourself. They won't know it happened in the silence, in the rooms where no one was watching, in the hours you spent choosing yourself again and again until you became someone who no longer needed to be chosen by anyone else. But you will know. That's the only part that matters. If something in this video names something you've been living without a name for, don't move past that quickly. Sit with it. That recognition is information. It's telling you something about who you are and what you actually need. If this reached you, share it with one person who needs to hear it, not for the channel. Because sometimes the most valuable thing you can do for someone is hand them the language for something they've been carrying alone. Subscribe if you want to keep going deeper into this. No noise, no performance, just the things that are actually worth thinking about. In the next video, we're going to talk about what happens when you stop needing people to understand you, not what it looks like from the outside, what it feels like from the inside, and why that shift is the one that changes everything else. The quiet ones especially will want to see it.